All right, let's look at Luke 17. Now we're just going to look at a section of Luke 17. This entire chapter is not dedicated to the end of the age in quite similar way as you could say Luke 21, of course Matthew 24, Mark 13, those type of chapters, very obviously like dedicated to just talking about the end of the age. Luke 17 has a little bit of other conversation that happens. So we're going to jump down to verse 22. Where Luke records Jesus sharing a very similar message to the Olivet Discourse. Of course, the Olivet Discourse does not have to be the only time that Jesus and his disciples had this conversation. In fact, you could imagine it might have happened a couple of times over the years where the disciples might have asked this question. And so here Luke is recording another telling where Jesus is answering this question and helping them understand what will be the signs of his coming. So we are going to compare a little bit of what Luke records in Luke 17 with what Matthew records in Matthew 24. Again, these are not necessarily parallel accounts, but there are some similarities to the way that Luke is going to describe how Jesus walks through some of these points. Very similar to Luke, but with, of course, some distinctions that I feel like we want to be able to see. So I'm going to move the scripture over on our screen so that you can see both. We've got Luke 17 on the left and Matthew 24 over here on the right. So you can see them together and we can compare back and forth. Now in Luke 17, starting in verse 22, Jesus tells his disciples, "The day is coming when you will desire to see one of the days of the Son of Man, but you will not see it." So they're not going to live long enough in their natural life to live to see the full fulfillment of his second appearing. But he's going to describe what some of the signs of that are going to be. And it's very similar to what Matthew describes at the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24. He says, "And they will say to you, 'Look here,' or 'Look there,' as if there is some secret or discreet return of the Messiah just to a select few people." Because it's not going to be like that at all. "For as the lightning flashes and lights up the sky from one end to another," meaning not just in an instant, but in the expanse of the display. It's going to light up the entire sky, how the Son of Man returns. And that's exactly what Matthew has to say here as well. "For as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man." So Jesus had mentioned this to them in Luke 7, in what Luke is documenting in Luke 17 as well. But in Luke 17, Jesus says, "The Son of Man must first suffer and be rejected by this generation." Again, characterizing the first and second appearings of the Messiah, which the Old Testament also substantiated in Daniel 9, Isaiah 49, Isaiah 52 and 53. You could say Zechariah 11. And then look, Luke gets into just as it was in the days of Noah. Okay, now we've actually talked about this little message before today in what we covered for Matthew 24. Again, these are not parallel accounts of the same time that this was spoken, but it appears that Jesus would have shared this with them on a couple of occasions. So we're going to compare the notes for a moment, just to offer some clarity so that we can compare these side by side. I said that we would do this when I talked about Matthew 24. So here we are in Luke 17, comparing them side by side. "For just as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. There is a rebellion that precedes the broad sense of the coming of the Son of Man, the events that take place, including, of course, the abomination of desolation and the actual day of the return of Jesus. And first, there is this carelessness and this rebellion where people sense that there's a delayed accountability or complete lack of accountability. So just as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the Son of Man. People were eating and drinking and marrying and being given in marriage, very similar to what Matthew documents in Matthew 24. Until the day when Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, as it was in the days of Lot, when they were eating and drinking, buying and selling, planting and building. But on that day, Lot went out of Sodom, fire and sulfur rained from heaven and destroyed them all. So it will be when the Son of Man is revealed. Now what Luke goes on to document is very close to what Matthew documents as a description or warning of the abomination of desolation right here. Mark and Matthew both document this almost identically. Let's scroll up. This is now Mark 13 on the right-hand side, And then here's Matthew 24 on the right-hand side. So they're very similar, both talking about the abomination of desolation. Now in Matthew and Mark both, they say, when you see the abomination of desolation, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on a housetop not go down and take what is in his house. Let the one who's in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And here comes Luke in Luke 17, describing, as it was in the days of Noah and the days of Lot, this widespread rebellion. Then they're caught in a trap. And what is revealed is very similar to what Matthew and Mark document as the abomination of desolation. Luke says, on that day, let the one who's on the housetop not go down to the house to take them away. Likewise, the one who's out in the field not turn back. Of course, remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. Luke just telling them to flee, just like Mark and Matthew do at the abomination of desolation. And if we were to go back to the Old Testament narrative of how this sequence of events unfolds, we have a widespread rebellion and a period of false peace and prosperity that is interrupted and broken suddenly by the abomination of desolation and the aggression of the Antichrist. And that's exactly what Matthew and Mark warn of with the abomination of desolation. And then flee, get up out of there. That's what follows the rebellion. And then, of course, you have the coming of the Son of Man after the tribulation of those days. And it's similar. It's very interesting to see how Luke 17, again, not a account of a parallel account of the same event, but a teaching that is matching that sequence very interestingly when we look at them all together. Then Luke goes on to say, I tell you, in that night there will be two in one bed, and one will be taken and the other left. Okay, so now we come back down here to not knowing the day or the hour, and those who are taken. We come down to Matthew 24, 40 and 41. Luke 17 is very interesting because in Luke 17, he has set the stage for the abomination of desolation and the tribulation. And so when Luke is talking about one will be taken and the other left, it is often considered to be that the aggression of the destruction that's taking place in the tribulation is where there will be people who will be taken. They'll be taken in wrath and destruction. They're going to be taken by the aggression of the Antichrist. It's really the context of what Luke is describing if we just look at it plainly in Luke 17. That's why he's like, be watchful and get out of there. Because all of a sudden, all of this delayed accountability and all of this rebellion and lawlessness that you've been enjoying is going to be over with. It's going to be spoiled. In Mark 13 and Matthew 24, what spoils it is the abomination of desolation. And then they've got to flee and run. And then people are being taken. And they're not being taken in a good way. They're being taken in being slain and being taken prisoner. That's why they've got to flee. And then, interestingly, we get this little saying again about where the corpse is, the vultures will gather. This is in Matthew 24, also about the tribulation period. In Luke 17, the disciples are saying, Lord, when is this going to be? Like there's this great, sort of urgency about, wow, this is going to be the time when we need to be alert, when we need to be alarmed and watchful. So they're saying, where, Lord? And Jesus uses this phrase again, where the corpse is, the vultures will gather, meaning it's going to be self-evident. It's going to be obvious and easy to recognize, just like vultures recognize a corpse out in the open. It's going to be open and obvious for you to recognize as well. And then Jesus continues with the parable of the persistent widow, which I'm going to cover as a section of Luke 18.